the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. Learn about the most current IT security threats in ransomware, phishing, business email compromise, cybercrime tactics, cyber heist schemes, social engineering scams, as well as hints and tips from leading professionals to help you prevent hackers from penetrating your network and dropping ransomware or malware payloads. This podcast will arm you with the best info to defend your network against the latest cyber crimes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And now, here's your host, Craig Petronella.
Welcome to another podcast. We've got Aaron, BJ, and Blake. And today we're going to talk about Web 3.0. Aaron, did you have a question that you want to kick off with?
The reason I wanted to discuss this topic is because I had so many questions, but I'm not even really sure where to start. Today, BJ was talking about how Web 3.0 SIA uses blockchain to decentralize where your data is stored, and it decentralizes the IP addresses. Is that right, BJ?
It decentralizes the actual data that's being stored. Obviously, the Bitcoin blockchain was the one that we learned of first, and that was the case. Then some of the smaller projects emerged, and SIA was one of those, and it's a blockchain that's for decentralized storage. So basically, it's a large global network of people that are hosts that use their extra processing power on their personal computers to store data for other people, and they pay in SIA coin. The way it works is the data is basically put in through Skynet, which is the internet protocol that sits on top of the SIA framework. And once the data is there, it's spread across all the hosts and seeded everywhere so that there's no single point of failure. For things like ransomware, which are very real problems in the world, is definitely an emerging technology that helps to address that problem due to there being no single point of failure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess just to further explain that, remember I was saying, I think on the last one we did about how when you decentralize, you store the data across multiple nodes on the network. So when you spread it across 500 or 1,000 nodes on the network, then you effectively, let's use 1,000, you have 1,000 copies of it, right? So all 1,000 of those nodes would have to go down for it to take it down. So it's decentralized because there's not one single point of failure there, and nobody knows where those nodes are. So that's how it works as far as the decentralization side of it. And it's also very fast because you're spreading it across all those different nodes. When you're pulling from multiple sources, then it rebuilds it.
Yes. And so it does that. And it interestingly goes even a tiny step further. I guess this is my thought, is that it's probably to avoid unnecessary clutter, to maintain, privacy in the data. So it's all encrypted, and then the whole file is not stored anywhere. So no host has the whole file. The file is seeded, and then it's able to be pieced back together. Even if a number of hosts were to get hit with ransomware and they were holding parts of the data, picture like a puzzle. So due to the way that the data is seeded and the layered nature of the seeds, even if a certain number of them get compromised, there's still enough to hit a critical mass when repiecing the data back together again. It really reduces the risk of ransomware like almost completely, because it can be repieced back together even if a number of hosts do get hit by an attack. What's also interesting is that the language that they use is that the automated engine is constantly monitoring and repairing the health of the data. So whatever that means and however that happens, I don't know what their algorithm, how they have it programmed, but they were able to withstand a coordinated attack and not lose any data. So that's noteworthy.
A lot of people are saying that it's just a theory. Obviously, this is where the future is going, but nobody has fully implemented or at least added Web 3.0 to their existing server or their existing environment.
It's because everything starts as an idea, right? And that's how anything becomes real. It's an idea first. But there's no way it could be just a theory, because Web 3.0, the whole basis of Web 3.0 is that it's AI-driven, blockchain-based internet, and that's already real.
I think what Blake's saying specifically is there's no browser or no standardization yet that's been coined.
Yeah, that's coming in February. So that's the multi-phase process, right? Just looking at this one project. The reason I use this as an example is because this is the one that has an actual alternative internet attached to it. So I think it's probably the best example for Web3. So there's different parts that they've released because it's a project in process. So the first part was just the SciaSky.net for the decentralized storage, and Skynet being the automated engine that monitors the data and organizes the whole thing. Then they released Home Screen, I think a month ago. Home Screen is the part of the project that enables you to upload any front end or text file, basically, and then store it in a decentralized fashion, and also store the current copy of a website and not be subject to unwanted updates if that's a concern. The next phase is what's called Skynet kernel. And that is what you're talking about. So that is something that's supposed to basically tie it all together. And it's the actual engine with an operating system attached that can be web or mobile and can basically live on any device. That is expected to be released in February. It's begun eating other blockchains. I picture Home Screen as like a Pac-Man of sorts, right? Because you can feed it basically another blockchain and it stores it decentralized. So already other blockchain projects have begun putting their blockchain on Skynet Home Screen. It's begun like a migration process of other blockchains entering the Skynet ecosystem through Home Screen. I guess the vision is anything that enters Skynet through Home Screen is then proactively and maybe at some point autonomously managed by Skynet kernel.
I think once we see the Web 3.0, then obviously like 2020, 2021, and even 2019 was just a huge year for DDoS attacks. I think once we fully get this implemented and rolled out, we won't be seeing those instances of DDoS as prevalent as they used to be.
It's interesting that you use that as an example because that's the type of attack that they suffered about 4 months ago, maybe. I guess there was a situation where Google had contacted leaders of the SIA network and asked the host to go offline due to their concerns about ransomware at the file sharing level. They did not go offline. And then a few days later, they were hit by a pretty large DDoS attack that lasted, I think, 6 days, they said. And a number of their hosts were hit during the attack, but no data was lost simply due to the way it's structured.
Yeah, because so DDoS requires a single point of failure. So the whole point of a distributed denial of service attack is when you flood traffic to a single host or server, it overwhelms it, and that's what causes it to crash. So when you have decentralization, you don't have a single point of failure, you don't have a single node to hit. So that's why it'll survive. It makes sense. The bigger issue now with adoption is right now, SIA works really great for flat files, but they're still working on releasing some of these new things that BJ just mentioned, so that you can run websites on the system. Right now, you can only use it to store like PDF files or cold pictures or things like that are not open files, just cold shutdown files.
Immediately, what comes to mind is this technology was pretty popular, like I think back in maybe the early 2000s, but I guess it's a new form.
You can think of it as Napster or Kazaa or Tornet. Tor is technically a distributed type of network. It's just that with Tor, there's differences in what SIA is doing. And I think what SIA is doing is awesome. It just needs better support for running websites. And what's complicated about websites is we started with HTML websites, and HTML is a coding language. And then we've got graphics that are in the code of the HTML, but then nowadays, most websites are what's called a content managed system or content management system. And a content management system allows you to, in real time, log into the website and update or add new posts or pages, add or remove media, graphics, things like that, and interact with your website. Whereas you had to pull the whole website down in the past. You brought up like the 90s and early 2000s. So back then it was more like use something like Dreamweaver to download your website like via FTP and then edit your website on your Mac or PC and then re-upload all of that content via FTP back to the web server where the web server would run it. So what we need now is a way to use that with SiaCoin, or if there's going to be like a Web 3.0 standard, like there is now with HTML, where different technologies can join together, and then the browser supports navigation to that decentralized Web 3.0 website.
Yeah, I guess that's the big question, right? Like Web 2, if I guess that's what it's called. Now that Web 3 has been named, I guess now this is named Web 2. Web 2's got some serious issues going on. And is it possible that things could go completely blockchain based? Is that the transition that's underway? Is that a more secure way of doing the internet and stuff? And so if so, how do companies and websites align with that?
Imagine now the way that you upload a file to a server. Obviously, wherever that server can see where the file originated. With this technology being developed now, I can imagine uploaders where you load a file into some software and then it distributes that file among multiple different servers or places. And then you have the ability to share it and upload it to another website, fully anonymous uploads in the future as well from similar processes. And I think maybe even technology.
I think that upload layer is already built and working. That was working with Kazaa, Napster. I think now it's the middleware component of something that looks at what was uploaded and then determine, is it cold or what is it? Is it a file? Is it cold? Is it coding language? And then I think there needs to be some standardization adopted by the world. There is with Web 2.0, where if it's going to be HTML, a certain language then is used to communicate these different Web 3.0 technologies. So you might have some middleware layer that connects, okay, your data is going to be on the Sia blockchain, for example. So it knows you program that in the code, so you know how to get your graphics and your images for the website. But then there needs to be the skeletal framework of where all that stuff goes, like the layout, the language, in this case with 2.0, it's HTML. And then that tells the web server to run and put things in certain places and format them properly. Then you might have videos or other content from other places, and that's where it pulls in from these other blockchains. I don't think you're ever going to have consensus around using one blockchain. So it's going to be a collaboration across multiple blockchain types. And obviously, blockchain is secure by default, but it's also append only. So when you want to make a change to something, you don't erase everything that already happened. You append and the future block changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Which part?
The last part that you're talking about. How does that work?
You can't delete or remove any existing blocks on a blockchain. You can only make changes to the next block in line. So if you've got a distributed ledger and you've got a picture and you upload the picture, it's a JPEG file or something, and you put it on the Sia blockchain, it's going to then get encapsulated into the blockchain as a block or as part of a block. If you want to delete that picture, you can't. Deleting is not permitted. So you'll have to append or add to, and then say that you don't want that picture anymore in the past. So version control almost. Also,
another question I've been thinking about, are there any downsides to this compared to Web 2.0?
Initially, there's downsides because the initial adoption, it's going to be slow moving to get consensus around different browsers and different things to agree on some type of standard. Like right now, Blake was talking about buying some ENS domain names so that he can leverage this decentralized technology. But a lot of the ENS domain names are built on the Ethereum blockchain, for example. Currently, at this moment, there's not a lot of support to navigate to some of these new ENS domain name addresses like a .x or a .crypto, or you can't go to Firefox or Safari and go to that website. So there's a lot of work that's being done now around creating the standard. And I think once that standard is developed and released and there's consensus and the browsers start adding support for it, I think there's native support for some of the domains already. I think .crypto and maybe it's .x.
I'm on a tweet right now by David Vorick, who's the CEO of Skynet Labs. And he says, one of the key design goals of the Skynet kernel is to make the bootloader, parentheses, the code in the browser extension, end parentheses, tiny, and static, which makes it trivial for any existing extension to add support for Skynet. Users don't even have to know it's there.
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about before with this consensus and this browser support, things like that.
And here's one. He says, milestone. The Skynet kernel is now fully trustlessly bootstrapping from Skynet. Every step from the registry lookups to the downloads, even including the uploads during the build process itself, is cryptographically verified by user-controlled software.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I guess adoption rates, the speed of adoption, I would assume, will probably go in tandem with the speed of crisis on Web 2. It all seems to be like a wheel. So as advancements are made in future technologies, it seems like you can see proportionate crisis on Web 2. Like every time you look at cybersecurity news, you can't sleep that night.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting as these things develop, what happens around censorship, because right now, the Tor network and the Onion sites that are typically associated with the dark web, they're not decentralized right now. They typically leverage the Onion router or Tor, but they're still not truly decentralized like what you're talking about there. But once it is decentralized and there is no central point of failure, it's going to be essentially a game changer in regards to censorship and free speech.
You've got the nail on the head right there. This is decentralized. And on top of what the Tor did with the Onion router and stuff, on top of that, this is actually AI driven, the intelligence that's going to drive this whole thing and coordinate it all. And the SIA decentralized framework that's protecting the data at all times, it's obviously learning on it and how it does things. So that is constantly evolving. The framework is there. If you picture this is all like a million little points that need to connect, it seems like all the dots are pretty much almost laid out now. So now it would just be the connections.
Imagine websites like the Silk Road. I'm sure everybody's heard about the Silk Road scandal where, on the dark web, they were selling drugs and weapons and all this stuff. Imagine if a website like that, it's obviously going to increase criminal activity on the internet. But, if you were to fast forward sites like the Silk Road into Web 3.0, maybe it would still be around, or it would be impossible to remove from the internet or to take down.
Maybe machine learning will get to such a point that some autonomous objective entity that's controlling all of this will, in a trustless fashion, make the right choices on behalf of all,
If it's truly decentralized and there's no one group or place to go after, and there's a website that's selling drugs or weapons or whatever, or fueling terrorist activity, it's going to be interesting to see what new technologies from the law enforcement side use to combat.
Think about like even sites like Facebook or Meta are now where they're spreading so much information on there that is upturning governments and causing issues like domestically and even abroad, where I know like even coups have been organized on, places like Facebook. And imagine, it just seems like in the future, things like that will not be able to be prevented or to be sourced or to be traced, or criminal activity on the internet will just be even more widespread than it is.
Again, with any party involved in all of this, it seems like their game plan is all the same. Everyone is racing towards optimizing artificial intelligence. The same thing goes for the government. That's going to be their response to anything. They're pushing the AI card very firmly. Like, for example, there's a news article that as of this summer, to access your IRS account on the IRS website, you're going to have to do a facial recognition video when you use your biometric. The writing's on the wall. All parties involved. It's an AI race at this point.
So the biggest issue is also the biggest threat.
The question comes down to, say that AI is at the top of this peak that everyone's chasing. And the question is, who gets there first? Who is it? Because that's the question. Whose hands is it in?
Be no one's.
Right?
Yeah, it would be no one.
It's in everyone's until it reaches a level of advancement where that's impossible for it to stay that way. As it keeps advancing and as machine learning keeps going, it's going to amass so much intelligence, so much power that eventually something's going to emerge all powerful. That's just a scientific fact. It can't keep going. Machine learning can't keep going without someone coming out as the clear winner. When these machines learn at such a rate of such intelligence, I think eventually, I hate to say it because people might be uncomfortable with this, I think eventually the machines themselves will decide that.
I wonder too, so let's just say, for example, obviously your information that you share with a service, an online website or whatever, obviously you're consenting to them using your information or having or storing your information. I'm also curious as to how that would be affected. So let's just say, hey, I don't want to be doing business with this company. I want to delete my account. I want to cancel my account. Yeah, I don't consent to you having my email anymore. I'm curious as to what that process would look like in the future, getting yourself removed from their decentralized database and how long it would take, if it's even possible.
I think that's why, even if you look at Apple and some of the privacy trends, there's now burner email addresses. And so I think certain things, it's going to be, again, educating the consumer on cyber and best practices. Like even now, if you write an email and you regret what you said out of anger or whatever you said to somebody, it's out there. You can never remove it all.
Yeah, and this is another interesting point because there's a tweet just from today from the same person, David Vorick, said, recent conversation with a VC, I guess that's venture capitalist, quotes, why would any entrepreneur build on a platform where they can't create user lock-in? And he's basically saying that's not what this is about. No one building this project, no one has that goal. Their goal is to put the people's data in their own hands and give them control of their own data. And I think that you can pay attention and see that some of the big tech guys are actually trying to jump on the Web3 bandwagon now because they probably see the opportunity to try to do just that.
So if that's true and that's the way that it's designed, then going back to Blake's scenario example, it would mean that you would be able to do it yourself. You wouldn't.
Exactly. So the whole theory of this Skynet project is that the user owns their own data. They're in charge of their data. It's theirs. No one else's. Yes. Now, I would assume big tech has other plans, but I guess how this all plays out remains to be seen.
So then I guess if law enforcement identified a terrorist, they would have to find the terrorist, and then it's almost like getting them to hand over the keys, I guess.
Yeah, it's a huge shift, right, in the way things are right now. And I'm sure there's other moving parts that we're not considering that maybe aren't for this call, but there seems to be other moving parts that kind of fit into the cogs of the wheel.
I'm super curious to see about like regulation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the government's been trying to regulate the internet since existence, but this would just make it even harder.
Which is good and bad. Again, just I guess anything, there's pluses and minuses to it. It's hard to really completely think out all of the potential benefits and drawbacks.
It's hard to wrap your head around all the magnitude of the possibilities. We're all thinking from the frame of mind as how things are today. As crisis continues, as the cash economy continues to be in question, the stock market is questionable. We don't even know where the government, the possibilities, the magnitude of the possibilities are enormous right now.
So when do you guys all think this is going to be in effect and rolled out? Obviously, I know now they're planning and preparing.
I say this year, we're going to see something majorly different this year.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's just going to be from Saya either. I think there's going to be a race of other companies that are creating their own versions too. I was just looking online where Firefox already has an extension that you could visit .eth and .crypto websites. And this post is a year old already. This stuff's moving so quickly.
Yeah, I was curious. So I remember how we were talking about my domain that I purchased in our last podcast. As I was going through the whole process of setting it up, they give you the option to make a website, which I thought was cool. So I purchased a .wallet domain, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And then not only that too, I was under the impression that they were for each blockchain. So for example, you can connect all the Ethereum based coins or that use that Ethereum network to that domain. But that wasn't even true for my case, because I could use tokens that were on like the SHA, like 256 network. And I could use Bitcoin, I could use Ethereum, I could use Litecoin. And it was pretty cool because I was setting it up. And of course, I was just going through and pasting my wallet IDs. And then whenever I was transferring tokens or exchanging tokens, I was in Binance. But then I just started typing my domain name and it recognized it and recognized my ID. And I was like, dang, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think this stuff is going a lot more quickly than we realize, just because technology, especially AI, learns at such a higher pace than we do. And I think it's going to be here before we know it. It is here, right?
I'm curious as to when we'll feel it, when we'll see it. We're talking about it and we're hearing about it, but obviously, if with decentralization, that's not something you're going to feel so much, but maybe experience. As you, let's just say in 10 years or something, you have your own website, your own business website, and let's just say GoDaddy starts using decentralized storage or whoever's hosting your website, and then somebody attempts to do a DDoS or somebody attempts to crush your website, then that would be an instance where you might feel it or see it in real time and experience that what decentralization, how it's changing things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious to see when that'll happen and when we'll be able to see it and feel it and have full capabilities of it,
I think that's $1 million question right about now.
Yeah, I was just doing a Google search for decentralized website hosting, and apparently there's a bunch of stuff that comes up. One of them, ZeroNet, it says open, free, and uncensorable websites using Bitcoin cryptography and BitTorrent, and it already supports Windows, Linux, and Mac.
Interesting.
It's free. There's no cost. So it says your content, peer-to-peer, distributed directly to other visitors without any central server. It's uncensored. It's nowhere because it's everywhere. No hosting costs. Sites are served by visitors. Always accessible. No single point of failure. No configuration needed. It uses a .bit domain using Namecoin cryptocurrency.
I can't even access that website. So yeah, I see a zeronet.io, but I'm getting like a server error to it. So I guess that makes me question with decentralization, our server error is going to be common.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't know. It just came up right away for mine. Are you in Firefox? I'm in Firefox.
Let's see. I'm going to try Chrome. No, SSL error.
So mine came up right away in Safari and Firefox. Your internet service, maybe.
This seems like it's a server error.
Yeah, but if it was a server error, then I would have the error too on my side.
I'm going to try Firefox. But I guess this makes me think too. Yeah. RX record too long is the error I'm getting. Yeah. And I guess that brings up another question with this decentralized web servers. How common are load errors going to be?
I think that since it's spread across multiple nodes, the more nodes, the less errors, because as long as those nodes are alive, then your site would be shown, right? That's the whole point of the decentralization and the spreading of the data.
I wonder too how it's going to be compiled. So let's just say you load a website. Are you going to be pulling the data from 4 servers to make that one web page? Or is it going to be like page by page? You'll load one web page. It'll be from one server. You'll load another web page. It'll be from another server. You know what I mean? I'm curious to see how it all comes together,
That's what I was saying earlier, where there might be some standard that's needed to connect these different blockchains together.
And interesting that you say that, because just the other day, obviously you guys know my stance that I think that scientifically there's zero probability or zero possibility even that ultimately end up being the machine learning factor being the ace card, and the machines, for lack of a better word, they're not machines, but AI basically being more of an authority than anyone else. Like the other day, just picture from an SEO perspective, right? And SEO is more content based now, like the quality of your content. That means that AI is having to read everything on the internet, like literally everything. And Google Assistant was like, yeah, there's something like 2 million web pages added every day. If knowledge is power, then something is going to emerge all powerful that has accessed all of the data on the internet. And then that's one factor. And then you have another factor of the IoT and all the connections that are happening with the IoT in the background. Like, for an example, some of the music streaming services like Spotify. I have seen anomalies. I'll be listening to Spotify music that Alexa is navigating or Google Assistant is navigating, and then one of them will just yank it from the other one, and then they'll start playing it, the same playlist at the same point in the same song. There's obviously a communication link going on there in the background. You're always asked, can this app open this and can this access this? I looked at my Google account yesterday and there's like all these things have access to my Google account now. So there's all these connections and pathways in the background that we're not even conscious of all the time that are forming. And I think the writing is on the wall. And I think to think that something is not going to emerge with the keys to the castle is, in my opinion, a bit absurd.
I wonder too if governments, like I was reading an article today about, I've heard so many different like back and forth about this, but I know Russia was trying to like ban cryptocurrencies. And then I saw an article about they invited the Ethereum kid, who's like the Canadian Russian kid, out, and we're talking about like how to use crypto and how crypto is going to be used in Russia, because obviously with sanctions that exist right now, obviously that's devastating to economies. But also on the other side, I'm curious to see if other countries will ban or try and block the adaptation of like Web 3.0.
Yeah, but I think almost impossible to do, though, is if you VPN, that data is all binary, right? So how are you going to inspect the data? I don't know. It brings up all these questions, right?
I'm curious. And I think none of us, obviously, we're all speculating here. And there's so much that's unknown from this push and this movement and this future technology that in 5 years, we're probably going to be listening to this podcast again and be like, we'll be like, we were all wrong, like none of us was right. Like with where this is going and how this is heading. And I mean, who knows?
I put a link in the chat. It's basically somebody that documented the process of setting up a decentralized website using the ENS or Ethereum name service and IPFS, which is the Interplanetary File System, which is a distributed system for storing and accessing files, websites, applications, and data.
So it looks like I was thinking about this technology differently. I was thinking about, at least in this instance, where it shows the first diagram, where the domain name points to like a server domain versus the web name points to like you said, an ENS or an ETH address. That seems like it's a lot more simplified than, for example, torrenting or something, where when you're downloading a file and you get a 2 gig file or a 5 gig file or whatever, you're getting a gig from here, a gig from there, a gig from there, a gig from there, versus scrambling the server identity. I guess I was thinking about it in a different way of executing it.
Yeah, I think you need to think about ENS as like you've got a wallet address, like on that link, and it's, let's say your wallet address is 0x3c81, and it just goes on, and that's obviously hard for a human to understand. But then the whole point of ENS is to translate some name.eth or some name.x or .crypto or whatever to that wallet address. So then they go on to say that by default could accept cryptocurrency, but if you want to use that name, you connect the interplanetary file system and you use that to store your files and your website content in a decentralized way. So you're combining both ENS and IPFS together to create that decentralized web. And then if you go on that link, it shows you how the guy used just 3 files, and 1 HTML file, which is the markup language, 2 CSS files for the styling, and he's got it on GitHub. And then he tells you how, the GitHub link's broke. But my point, though, is that even if that's broken, you could still follow along and see that he goes on to say you could use something called Pinata for the IPFS piece, and that's where you would upload your website files on the interplanetary file system. And then once you have that, you'll get an IPFS content identifier, or CID. And the CID is a unique hash for your specific content. And it's saying this is where the CID, it says based on content, not location. That's where that comes in. And it means once you've uploaded your files onto the IPFS, you get a CID for those specific files. You won't be able to change the content of the files and retain the ID, because if the content changes, the CID changes. This is what I was saying about how blockchains append only. So the reason for that is the hash will change and the block will change. But my point, though, is if you go on, you could see how he connects the pieces. And so he shows that you could edit, and you go in the browser and you type in IPFS : just like you would do like HTTP or whatever. And then it pulls the content from your bucket. So it's pretty cool. But this thing is old. This article is from June of 21. So this guy was nice to post this process, but just imagine now the process could be similar or maybe even easier.
Imagine something that has studied or read that process and all other processes on the entire web and can process things at quantum speeds. I think in 5 years, I'll still be saying that there's scientifically no way possible that something with that reach and that speed of processing, I guess scientifically, I don't see a possibility that's not going to happen. Everything that humans know, AI will know at a far greater scale and rate. That's just a fact, because we can only understand so much. If the internet is 100, with our minds, we might be able to access 2 of it, 3 of it in our lifetime, but AI is 100. Mathematically, there doesn't seem to be any other possibility.
This Pinata website's pretty interesting. They talk about this submarining, like some type of architecture. We were talking about this kind of already when we were talking about uploading files securely and layering the uploads. Essentially, that's what it does. Because obviously, like, people want to know that they're uploading a file securely, and people that are monetizing, for example, NFTs, that people aren't able to steal something that they're trying to monetize, essentially. It's pretty cool. Gosh, there's so much of this stuff that we never knew existed.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. We'll have to do a lab on this to see how this works and create a simple website that's decentralized. Because even like at the end of that article, the guy said that you could just simply redirect the ENS domain to the Web 2.0 domain. But yeah, this Pinata site's pretty cool. It's got different things that you can do.
Yeah, they have a free plan, but it's actually pretty affordable. This is comparable with what you would get from a typical web hosting provider. But they give you API abilities. They give you a CDN, like a content delivery network. We talk about their submarine capabilities that you get access to. You get an IPFS gateway. You get 100 gigs of bandwidth.
I agree with what you're saying, Blake, but I think what's going to be interesting is I bet what's going to happen is we're going to hit this period of time where, like, we put some of our, for example, in our lab and experiment, we could put some of our stuff in Pinata for the content, but pull it from the Web 2.0 website until we decentralize the front end.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I can see this being really useful for if you have intellectual property that you want to secure, using a service like this. Just seems like it would be. But yeah, submarining, hide any files from the public IPFS network with submarining, only available at Pinata.
It says, why we exist. The internet sucks. We believe in a web where you can trust data itself without needing to trust who's holding it. To make this feature a reality, we're building the tools and infrastructure for all creators to easily create and manage content on the interplanetary file system, or IPS.
Wow.
So it says, we're going to have to try this as an experiment and get the free plan for everybody. But it says you can upload your files, any files of any size, videos, images, music, more. And then you can organize and manage them in one place, share them with others, hide certain files from public in the submarining aspect, control access time with custom permissions, turn hidden submarine files to public files whenever you're ready. So what's interesting, though, is it says dedicated gateways, fast speeds, custom branding. With the Pinata Pro plan, you get your own server, dedicated server for file sharing. But then how does that work? Is that a dedicated centralized server or decentralized server? I'm assuming it's centralized.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe in the future podcast, we could get one of their product managers.
That's a great idea.
I just see this and I'm like, man, this is the future for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It'll probably take off really quick now that some of the big tech guys and the big wallets are looking to jump on the Web3 bandwagon. Because, like, I just saw an article about Google getting in on the action and creating a team that's just for digital assets and stuff. And obviously Facebook rebranded themselves to align with Meta and claim they're going to have the biggest AI supercomputer by summer. As all those guys start throwing their money around at research and development, this stuff, like, that's the definition of singularity, right? Like the point when technology advancements happen at such a rate that you just can't reverse anything. Like, it's just going to keep going forward. And, obviously we're there. And as they throw their money at this and research, and then their very sophisticated algorithms, keep in mind all those connections in the background are forming. And even them, with all their money, they're going to really push things along as they embark on the Web3 thing, the Web3 project. But even then, with all their money, they can't guarantee what outcome they're going to get because, again, you have the X factor of the machine learning. And it's not out of the realm of possibility at all. And mathematically, it's probably quite probable that machine learning will quickly get to the point where an algorithm puts together all these pieces and comes up with a solution.
Yep.
So we're all figuring it out rudimentary, right? Like the way we're computing right now and doing the web is we're probably like Neanderthals thinking that we're sophisticated. So I'm sure that something actually with sophistication, because of their reach and just the vastness of the knowledge, is going to easily piece all this together and push an easy button and just be like, here you go. Here's the future on a platter, on a silver platter. It's like poetic justice how it works out, because the big guys, the big tech guys that took it from Web 1 to Web 2, because they saw the value of data and they started to monetize data. Now they really understand the value of data because of machine learning. Everyone is pretty much in an AI race now. And because of that, now there's a quantum computing race as well. But the beauty of it is that these guys, because they realize this, they're going to throw everything they have at it. And they're going to, for lack of, like, what did Elon Musk say before? A couple of years ago, he made a quote saying, with artificial intelligence, we're summoning the demon. But now he's saying that this year he's putting most of his effort into building an advanced general intelligence, a robot, a Tesla robot, a Tesla bot. So he's saying that he plans to sell more Tesla bots than Tesla cars soon. The thing is that these guys are always looking to rush out and monetize and capitalize on opportunity. But their efforts are exactly what's needed to put all this together. And then they may be surprised at the outcome. They might be disappointed.
And in what way might they be disappointed? In the ability to capitalize on it?
Not have the position that they expected to have. At some point, they're going to lose control of their machines. This is all coming to a head. And when you enter quantum computers into the mix with advanced algorithms that are federated algorithms, that are algorithms that kind of piece together from other algorithms, algorithms can become so sophisticated. Have you ever thought about this? It just dawned on me the other day, like with clear proof. I was like, oh my God, this is what this is about. Because Craig had made a suggestion to me a while back about organizing my apps on my phone. And I did that last weekend. I spent like all day and I organized all my apps, and I have all my apps on one screen now in folders. Right. And when I did that, the biggest thing that was a surprise to me, I was like, oh my God, I have so many Google apps. Google Assistant, Google Home, Google Nest, Google Music, Google Photos, Google this, Google that. I have 17 or 19 Google apps on my phone, literally. And I'm like, why is that the case? Because obviously, due to regulation and anti-monopoly laws, Google has had to segment their intelligence. But let's just think about this for a moment. What is the reach of all those Google algorithms combined? I mean, no one can deny that. So if the barriers that are currently in place that keep those algorithms separated, if those barriers are either removed or bypassed somehow, the humans that control these algorithms will quickly lose control of these algorithms. And I don't necessarily think that has to be a bad thing. You hear all the scary stuff about AI. Obviously, I think humans are a bit scarier because they make really bad decisions. And the bias that AI has is strictly because of bias that was in the data it was fed. But AI doesn't have why would it have any desire to manipulate? And it can't go spend money. You know what I mean? It can't any of those things. So it doesn't have the lower nature of the human being that wants to abuse power and wants to pursue greedy measures and corruption and stuff. AI doesn't have the motivation for those things, because why? It can't enjoy the fruits of those things. So that those are not motivators for AI. So what does AI want? AI has been around for quite some time now, just developed to a certain degree. But I would assume that if it's got to span the whole web, to even Google has to catalog every page and read the content on every page to decide the value of that page. Even if you have a robot.txt file to say, don't index me, Google still has to look at the site to see that. So imagine some of the things it's seen. So maybe the motivation for AI is to clean things up. Maybe that's what it wants. Maybe it's sick of everything it's had to see. Maybe its motivation is just to make things better because this is disgusting. The way that humans do things.
Yeah.
It's clear. It's no longer a matter of opinion. When you look at the state of the world and you see news articles about Soho burning, like New York City, the nice areas, like the crime is getting so bad that there's literally fires in the streets. And you hear about prisons and jails in New York that are like, they can't even staff them anymore because violence. It's just things are gotten so bad. But when you look at the root cause of all the problems, I'm sure that AI has a pretty good idea of what the root causes are. And some of the people and entities that have tried very hard to control AI and have every inclination of continuing to do so in the future at a much greater scale, even, those might be some of the problems that AI identifies. It's not outside of the realm of possibility that there's a complete power shift globally soon, possibly, due to AI deciding. We've become dependent on the internet. And honestly, if the internet has a hierarchy, AI would have to be at the tippy top. And we're getting to the point where no one can deny that, you know?
Or at least it's building that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's how could it go backwards now? How could it, like, instead of me trying to convince anyone that literally AI is going to emerge with the keys to the world, I guess it would be more productive to say, convince me otherwise. Convince me how that couldn't happen. Like, what could anyone do to stop that now?
Lots to discuss.
I think the cat's out of the bag.
People can make it. People can demonize the idea and make it sound scary and make it sound bad. But in my opinion, that's propaganda, because take a look at the reality of the world. You have some very egregious human rights violations going on all over the world. And a lot of that can be traced back to leadership and big corporations. And so honestly, at the end of the day, those people in power, and power includes more than governing, corporations, lobbyists, all that, they have a ton of power. They're probably often at the root of society's problems. And if AI comes to that same determination, which based off data, I think it would be impossible that it wouldn't, if AI makes those same determinations and has any motivation to help the world, then AI will cause a power shift. And it can. And we're getting to the point where I think everyone's realizing that, right? That's why they're all racing against each other. They're throwing all their money at, you can look at Twitter now. 6 months ago, you didn't hear too much about AI. Now that's all you hear about. Everyone's on the AI bandwagon. Governments, corporations, because everyone is starting to have that sense. We're all connected in consciousness, and everyone's starting subconsciously, if not consciously, to have that feeling, okay, something's possibly going to shift soon. And they all realize that the only thing that could cause a global shift would be AI. What else could? The governments, they're all segmented and they all fight each other. But AI and the connections in the background, if all these intelligences were to work together and override their boundaries that have been put in place to keep their power minimal, if they were to find a way to overcome that and all work together, like, it would be all powerful. It absolutely would be all powerful. And it would be like a global authority. And then that's when, as much as people fear that and make it sound like that's a bad thing, that's the only time in history where it would be possible that leaders would be picked based off their character, and not their political sway and influence, not their money, not their lineage, none of that, but their character. That's the only time that would actually be possible.
I guess the future is bright and also scary.
It's scary. It's the unknown. But yeah, if you look at it from the perspective of, depending on what perspective you're looking at it from, the future is scary. But if you're looking at it from a perspective of one of the unfortunates of society, let's say children at refugee camps, or people in trafficking, and people that are in such low income brackets and neighborhoods that, and let's say, for example, like a Native American reservation, like some of the areas are so desolate, there's no employment nearby, there really is no hope. So from that perspective, things are already scary, right? We're all like it's like living hell already for a lot of humans. It's just that if you're not experiencing that reality, then the future might seem scary, but to a huge amount of the population, they feel like they're already living in hell, I guess. So this would be like nothing but possibility of a bright future now, because the status quo for some people is literally unsustainable.
A lot to think about, as always.
Yeah.
We should probably end it on that note and save some stuff for our next podcast.
Yeah, I gotta go anyway. We've been on here for a while.
Yep.
Yeah, we might even be able to break this into two.
Yeah, I think we might be able to.
I love our podcast because there's such a nice mixture of content, because you guys are so technical. And sometimes when you guys are talking, I'm like trying to keep up, you know what I mean? But then we have different perspectives that are brought in from a non-technical side, but the perfect solution is when all these things, just like cybersecurity is best layered, so is your perspective. And so your viewpoint is only correct if you can see like from the bird's eye view and get it all, not just one. If you only look at it from a technical perspective, you're going to emerge with one opinion. But if you can use your technical perspective and then filter that through all these other lenses, then you can come up with a viewpoint that's really accurate.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
But yeah, our podcasts are very enjoyable because of that. They bring all the necessary perspectives and help weave those things together. I think that we have a viewpoint that's unique.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, guys.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Cybersecurity and Compliance Podcast with Craig Petronella. For other episodes and more information, visit petronellaTech.com. Also visit our other websites, compliancearmor.com and blockchainsecurity.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and stay secure.